Hello and welcome Peter, and welcome Ian. Before we continue, before we start talking about the technology, before we start talking about the new features, let's talk about people. Who are you? Introduce yourselves. Peter, you are just kind of here. Peter, tell us who you are, what do you do, and what brings you here?
Sure. I'll look up as I talk to you, Darko, so we kind of maintain. So my name is Pete Deming. I work on the S3 product management team. So my job here is to listen to our customers and then try and convince Ian that this is what we should build and why it's the best thing ever, and then work with Ian to go deliver that. So that's what I do here at AWS.
Where are you based out of? I missed that.
I'm in Boulder, Colorado.
Boulder, Colorado. Wow, that sounds amazing. Ian, the same questions for you.
Hey folks, my name is Ian McGarry. I'm a senior software development manager at Amazon S3. I'm based in Vancouver, BC, British Columbia, in the Great White North. So all on the American time zones. I'm not as far away as you, Darko, but still a bit of a drive or a fly up north. I lead the teams within S3 who have helped to deliver multi-region access points yesterday for Storage Day. And Peter is very effective at convincing me to build things. I will say that, including multi-region access points. So yeah, super excited to talk to you all about it today.
Awesome. Well, let's first of all let's ask the basic question. What is this thing that you're launching? What is this thing you have launched? What is S3 multi-region access points?
Sure. So Darko, Jenna, for the last 15 years, S3 has had our buckets in individual regions. And when you wanted to talk to a bucket in a region, you had to tell us which bucket you wanted to talk to and which region that bucket was in. And our customers have really kind of grown up with S3 and now are developing applications and business tools that need to be able to access data in multiple AWS regions. And so a multi-region access point, its job really is to have a single global endpoint that represents right now 1 to 17 different AWS regions that you could have data in, and have a single global endpoint then to reach that data.
So let me get this straight. Let me bring a bucket. It's a cup, but it's a bucket. So I am a customer, and I put all of my files in this bucket. If all of my customers are sitting in Germany, they will access this bucket, which is launched in Germany. They access it through Germany. If I have customers wanting to reach it from Japan or from the West Coast, they also have to come to Germany. Long way. Unless I replicate my bucket, right? Is that the case here?
That's right. So you're going to be replicating that data, but once you've replicated that data, now are you talking to a bucket in Germany?
2 buckets, yeah.
2 buckets? Which bucket are you talking to, Darko?
Okay, exactly. Yeah, that's the point, right?
So in that case, the data can be out of sync, potentially. Is that the case?
That's right. And so S3 cross-region replication is our technology that allows us to either send that data to multiple buckets if it's all being written to Darko's bucket in Germany, and we want to spread that data out to multiple regions. We can have multi-destination replication for that, to put all of that same data in those multiple buckets. But let's say you wanted to synchronize that data so that data written to either bucket would be the same in both locations. That's our bidirectional replication with S3 on our cross-region replication.
Okay, and these access points, basically they give you the ability to automatically detect. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So if you have a specific access point, and my customer accesses my bucket from anywhere in the world, they will always be pointed to the closest bucket. Is that the case, or am I getting this wrong?
No, you've got that right. And so actually, this is where I'm going to have Ian talk a little bit about the secret sauce and magic behind how we accelerate those requests.
Yeah, absolutely. So the very cool thing about multi-region access points is that we took a lot of existing AWS technologies, including cross-region replication, and we've added the secret sauces that Peter just referenced, which is Global Accelerator and Private Link, to be able to achieve these kinds of cross-regional or optimized routing. So, it's in our blog post, and I encourage folks to take a look, but we talk about the 60% performance increase up to. That's all because of the Global Accelerator network that we have underneath. And that's a product available today to customers, but we've leveraged that for multi-region access points. And now what you'll find is that wherever clients are based, they will be routed to the closest bucket to them. So if, for example, you had a bucket in Dublin, you had a bucket in London, and you were based down the south of Ireland, where I'm from, and you were putting your pictures up there, you would get routed to Dublin, not to London. But your data could be replicated across to London, so people over there can access it too. And vice versa, for somebody in London, they would get routed to the London bucket.
But the access point is always the same, right? This point where, okay, so that's the difference. Because
Yeah.
I recall a long time ago, S3 replication was a thing, but if you wanted a customer to access your specific bucket in a specific region, they would use the URL for that region, right? The access point, well, not an access point, but they would access access that bucket through a specific means. Okay, got it.
Exactly.
And this thing also replicates data, right? So multi-region replication multi-region access point do not just create access points, but they also do the data replication as well.
Well, so the way that actually works, it's kind of layers of a cake. So if you think of kind of how Ian talked about these existing S3 features, the multi-region access point just sort of acts as sort of the top layer of the cake. So it actually sits on top of the existing S3 features, including S3 cross-region replication. So that's actually the technology that's being used to move the data. So the multi-region access point, his job is not to really know what's in the bucket, but to find the lowest latency copy of that data. And what we do with cross-region replication is that's what is actually moving the data and putting the same copy of the data in multiple buckets, so that when you reach that global endpoint, which is your multi-region access point, when we make that request, like Ian said, to Dublin or London, it's the same data in either bucket. So we'll just pick the fastest, lowest latency path to that copy, regardless of if you're in London or Dublin or in the US, China, wherever you might be.
Right. Awesome.
So you've talked a little bit about performance here. Can you help us understand which customers are going to benefit from this, and why would they choose to use this?
Sure. So in this case, one of the main advantages that Ian talked about is that global accelerator network. So that's where we have all of those edge locations where we can take, let's say, an upload request for a photo, or let's say it's a large video file, or a large chip design, a high resolution chip design. Even some of those can be well over a terabyte. And so when we want to get that up into S3 as fast as possible as an upload, we don't want to send that across the public internet. We don't want to go through multiple hops. We want to onboard that onto the AWS global network at the closest local point of presence, that closest local network point of presence. We onboard that upload, transfer that again to the lowest latency bucket, and that's where you really see the performance advantage of this multi-region access point using the technology that Ian talked about, the AWS global accelerator.
Now, a question here is, we have a question from chat, and thank you. Please do post your questions in the chat as well. From Dan Lancaster. How does file locking work? Same file is opened up or edited from two different buckets, or being uploaded with the same name. Is there some sort of a way you handle those conflicts?
There is, and the beauty of it, again, kind of using our cake model, with cross-region replication, your buckets that you want to replicate between, those have to have versioning enabled. So versioning is kind of the foundational feature here that allows us to create multiple versions of the same object as you upload new versions of that same object, or go to delete that object. We just store each revision history as a specific version of that object. So when we go to replicate, we replicate those versions as well. So that's really how we handle any sort of conflicts, is if you're writing to a bucket and you want to replicate that bucket, versioning has to be enabled first, and that's what allows us to keep track and then sync the versions from both sides. So this feature really kind of gets you closer to an active S3 configuration, where you could upload videos from your cam to any bucket in the world, and then we're going to sync that data with that cross-region replication technology, which is built, again, layered on top of S3 object versioning, where we store each of those objects independently of the last one.
Awesome. Love that.
Yeah. We have another question from chat that I think is really interesting. This one's from Santosh. How does data privacy regulation compliance work with multi-region replication?
I love this question. This is actually something that's different about multi-region access points than some of the other solutions that are out there that are similar, but obviously a little bit different. So let's talk about the differences here. With cross-region replication being the engine of the data movement, that's actually what's transferring the data between the buckets. The cross-region replication rules themselves are very precise. They let you control what data you want to replicate to which bucket. So you do not have to have the same data in all of your buckets if you don't want to. You don't have to replicate all of the data in your bucket. You can select just at a prefix or a folder level, or you can even select at a tag level. And those are called scopes inside of your replication rule. So Jenna, what's the scope of replication that you want to replicate? Tell us the what.
Okay.
Is it just a folder? Is it everything in the bucket? Or is it just maybe data that's tagged with this tag?
File. Yep.
So if there's data
Okay.
you don't want to go across geopolitical borders, that simply would then be outside of your replication scope. You wouldn't include that in the replication scope behind this multi-region access point.
And do you also choose which regions to replicate to and from?
Correct. So you have complete control. Okay. It's very precise and lets you have that control of what data goes to which regions and is in which buckets. So that is one of the advantages of what Ian's team has built.
I think just the fact that you can choose which part of your bucket will be replicated is just chef's kiss. I love that fact because GDPR, data regulations, all of those things are quite important. And we tend to funnel a lot of data in a single place, data lakes and all that stuff. So I think this is really, really good for that. So I love that.
And the cost is also a big factor. Some customers simply have so much data that it's just not feasible for them to replicate everything, right? So that is one of the big differences in this solution versus others, is that precision of what data goes where.
Right. There's a question from somebody here on chat as well. I think I missed it from so from Okigan 2000. Now this question may not make sense because how do global endpoints find objects if it's missing in a bucket? For example, if I go to a bucket in my local region, can I see those different buckets? Can I see those individual buckets which this is being replicated to, or this is like a global thing?
Sure.
If I delete a file, for example, if I go to a bucket in Ireland and I delete a file in Ireland, does that file get deleted all over the place, or?
That's a great question. That goes back to our precision of our replication rules. So on the rule itself, we can actually instruct the replication engine to replicate deletions or not. So if you want to have your deletions replicated and propagated to your other replicas, that's simply a single checkbox. That is completely up to you. So some customers want that safety and security of, I don't want to replicate my deletions. I want to just keep the data in each bucket kind of unique. Or I do want to replicate the deletions, so I kind of keep them in sync. I want kind of a mirrored approach where I want to replicate deletions and I want to sync the data and the metadata. And those are specific options in the replication rule. And that also includes an option called replication time control. That's our premium replication offering that allows a customer to say, Jenna, I want a SLA with financial credits back to me if AWS can't match this SLA, can't meet this SLA of 99.99, so 4 nines, of all of my objects. 99.99% of all of my objects have to complete replication within 15 minutes or less. And Ian, I don't think we've paid out on that SLA yet. We haven't missed it yet. So I think our track record is pretty good when it comes to replication time control and that SLA. So if you want those buckets in sync and you need an SLA on your replication, that's really where replication time control comes in. Again, it's a single checkbox in your rule for replication.
That's a good point. How long does it take to replicate, right? So if I make a change in Ireland, how long do I have to wait for that change to occur in Tokyo?
Yep. Most objects complete replication in seconds to minutes, but with replication time control, that's where you get sort of that finite end fixed post of an SLA of 15 minutes or less for 99.99% of all of your objects. And we haven't missed that SLA yet.
Okay, amazing. Love to hear that.
One quick thing I want to jump in on as well, because we spoke a bit about the edge locations and the internet use cases, and I do not want people to forget that we've also launched with support for private link, and so you can privately access your data from within your VPC. You set up a VPC endpoint specific for multi-region access points, and then you can access your multi-region access points over that. And the very cool thing about that is that extends multi-region access points to on-prem if you're using Direct Connect or AWS VPN. And you can set up a multi-region access point to cover different regions, some of the US regions, and then you can have your VPC in Dublin, and you can be privately accessing that data replicated across those US regions, if at all, from your VPC in Dublin. So it's the private aspect of it is definitely a very, very cool aspect that I think folks will love.
That was actually one of my next questions, like private VPC endpoints. That is important. So folks out there, VPC endpoints enable you to access specific AWS services, not through the power of the internet, but through the AWS backbone. So without actually ever leaving your AWS network. So this feature is also very important if you want to have this set up as well. So amazing. I like that thing. So good. Also, just before we continue, I want to welcome all the new folks in the chat. Welcome. This is AWS On Air. This is a weekly show where we get to talk to our wonderful ghosts. What? I'm our wonderful guests
and hosts.
Guests and hosts. Our wonderful guests from the AWS service teams, and talk about the newest releases. Today we have Ian and Peter here talking about the latest launch from Amazon S3 called MultiRegion Endpoints. So yeah, feel free to ask us questions. Put the questions in chat, and we would love to have them answered right now. Okay.
I have a question. Have a question. How many regions is this available in?
Ian.
Yeah, this one is available in 17 regions at launch.
Okay.
So it's quite pervasive across AWS, which is really, really nice. I think we'll find that will make people's kind of brains start ticking about, wow, well, now where can I put my data, and where can I now reach out to my customers, right, and make their lives better. We've spoke to a number of customers about who are now, I guess, international, right? And their software crosses boundaries. And so now they can think about improving the performance that their own customers will see when using their software.
And regarding encryption, there's a question from a LinkedIn user. Unfortunately, we cannot see everybody's name, but that's LinkedIn. So LinkedIn user asks, does this support encryption of specific data at rest and data in motion?
Yes. So there's 3 different types of S3 encryption at AWS. And so the multi-region access points, they are encryption agnostic. So they're not aware of the encryption status of the data, but the replication engine is. So with SSE-S3 replication, that's our server side encryption, that is supported with replication, as well as KMS keys on those objects can be replicated. The only one that is not supported today is customer provided keys, so the SSE-C. So if those objects are encrypted with SSE-C, those cannot be replicated today with our replication engine, but that is something that we're looking at in the future. And that's regardless of if it's behind a multi-region access point or not. That's just a limitation of our current replication engine.
Okay, yeah, good point. So if you're using your own encryption keys in an S3 bucket, this is not working yet for you. So, but
that's correct.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, and just to cover the data in motion part, I mean, we also support TLS encryptions as well. So there's no concerns about data in motion being plain text or anything.
Okay, good. Very important, right?
Yes.
Especially
I saw the motion part.
Yeah. So, okay, good. Yeah. So it's also being encrypted in transit as well. So, good. Awesome. Now, kind of a question here. What kind of users do you see kind of really benefiting from this? I know Peter mentioned the chip manufacturers, like those high resolution chip images, for example. But what kind of other use cases do you see customers using the service for?
I can jump in. Peter has many, but one that I think is close to home for myself that I know about is just being able to provide customers with a single endpoint that all their clients can use to upload data optimally. So I kind of mentioned that a bit before about having, globally dispersed customers or clients that are trying to get data off them. So think of mobile phones, think of tablets, laptops, these kinds of things. They're trying to get data up to the cloud as quickly as possible. The way customers have solved this in the past is they have complex client logic baked into the client that will choose the right region based on where they are, or they'll have a proxy layer in between that will take the data and then decide where to go from there. Now you can just get rid of all of that, give it a single endpoint, and let AWS decide where to route it for the best experience. So I think that's just a really nice use case, and I'm excited to see that one be taken up by customers.
Excellent. Awesome. And we make a slight change of our ASL interpreters. Thank you very much. Cool.
So
ahead.
I have a question. I got another question. So I have some S3 buckets out there right now. What do I need to do if I want to start using this? What do I do? Can I start using it with my existing S3 bucket?
Sure, we can actually jump in and show you what that looks like here, but it's super easy, Jenna. Ian's team has done a great job. You can use your existing buckets that have existing replication rules on them, or you can make new buckets, or you can mix and match existing buckets and new buckets. So there is no magic bucket that you have to create or a special type of multi-region access point bucket. These are just existing buckets that you already have that you want to have a new global endpoint in front of, or these can be new buckets that you want to start from scratch with. And so it's completely your choice.
Okay. And then what do I have to make changes in my code, or like what's the extent of my code changes that I have to do?
Yeah, Ian, can you talk a little bit about our S3-global?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the interesting thing that we touched on at the very start about, well, before I had to configure a region. Now it's not necessarily a region, more so that you're configuring a global, right? So it is a global region, or a global namespace is the best way to think about it. And so your endpoint that you use at the very end doesn't actually have a region name in it. It has global in it. So S3-global is now our new, I guess, global namespace in that sense. And the work, or the extent of the work to update this to start using it, is obviously the configuration yourself in the console, or maybe SDK, CLI, or CloudFormation, to get things up and running, choose your buckets, create your multi-region access point, and then to update your client to now point to your multi-region access point instead of pointing to your bucket.
Okay, got it.
Peter, do you have anything?
Yeah, Peter,
sorry, go ahead.
So the name will change, Jenna. So this will have kind of an interesting looking endpoint name to it. And that's because obviously security is job one here at AWS. Yeah. So we obfuscate that endpoint name. We generate that for you. So it's not going to identify your company in it. You can't choose the name itself. But the reason why we do that is obviously that global endpoint can be representing a lot of buckets and a lot of data and a lot of different regions. And so when you go to talk to that endpoint, you're no longer talking to a bucket. So the format does change as well. You're actually talking to what we refer to as an ARN, or an Amazon resource name. Yep. And so that resource name is going to have a slightly different format to it, but you'll simply use that format for your gets, your puts, your uploads, your downloads, your list requests, those data operations. You'll just change sort of the pattern, or the endpoint really that you're talking to here. And what Ian did a great job with is, in the past, you've had to specify, Darko would have to specify US-East-1 or -2, or as this is the location of the bucket that I want to talk to. But what's new in this new endpoint name, this global name, is the region gets replaced with like a wildcard called S3-global. That S3-global is the new global region for all of the buckets behind it. So that's kind of how these two pieces fit together. So the change on your side, as an application or as a client or a developer, when you want to interact with S3, is you will use a different endpoint name. Can you still access the data in the buckets directly like you always have? Absolutely. It's just you now get a new global endpoint name that represents sort of like a bucket group.
Exactly. And here's an example. I've ran into this issue. So if you ever needed to install for example, the co-deploy agent on your EC2 instances, or even the ECS agent, if you go to our documentation and look to download one of those agents, they will usually direct you to a bucket nearest to you by actually entering the URL of the bucket nearest to you. So that thing is still it's this is a new service. So, but if imagine if that was applying multi-region access points, there would be a single URL and it will be automatically take you to the bucket that's closest to you, which is just a wonderful thing.
That's right. So you asked like what type of customers would be interested in this. Ian gave a great example, media companies with a lot of video and photos that need to be uploaded. But the other one is kind of one you just mentioned, Darko, which is kind of like if you're a software company, for example, and you have to make the daily build of your software package available to your engineers around the world. Well, now you can replicate all of that data with S3 and still give everyone a single global endpoint to go to get that daily build from, to pull that down and not have to worry about, well, which bucket is closest to me and which bucket should we talk to? And if we have, a connectivity challenge to that bucket on a Tuesday, well, now we have to go look for the next bucket. You don't have to worry about that anymore. You just always now have that single global endpoint to talk to.
Yeah, exactly. Excellent. So that's very good, especially if you're like looking to get data faster to your end users in specific regions. Now that data will be automatically closer to them, and they can automatically download it from the same URL, which is just, again, wonderful. This brings always a discussion. Look, we talked about S3 buckets and global presence and global distribution. The first thing that comes to mind is content delivery, right? Content delivery network, aka CloudFront. And actually, there's even a question here from somebody in chat. I think I missed it, but okay, I'll get to that question if I find it. I apologize. There we go. Thank you. Thank you, LinkedIn user. Is there any attention points? Is there something we need to pay attention to for S3 multi-region access points over CloudFront? So if you have if you're using S3 as a CloudFront distribution, does this impact it in any way?
It does. Today you have to make a choice. So CloudFront is, if you're up and running with CloudFront today, fantastic, keep using it, but you cannot use a multi-region access point as a CloudFront distribution origin. So those two are currently separate things. But if that's something that is appealing to you as a customer, Ian and I are here and ready and waiting for your feedback. If that's what you'd like us to go build next, we're interested in hearing more about that. But so today, Darko, to answer your question, those are separate. They do not today integrate with each other.
Okay. Good to know. I think it's very important. And, folks, chat, Twitch, LinkedIn, wherever you're watching us from, if you have ideas for feedback, service requests, let us know, right? It can be through us or it can be through your normal channels. We want to make the product that's the best for you. So, just tell us what you need. So, awesome.
I think are we ready for a demo?
Yeah, I think it's the demo time. Peter, we were told that you were going to show us something. So when you can share your screen.
I thought it was Ian. Is me?
Or Ian.
No, I'm just kidding. It's me. Just panicking a little
It's
bit.
me. It's Pam. It's Pam, actually. Pam's going to demo. Thank you, Pam.
All right.
Okay, Peter. Let's bring that up. While you're doing that, maybe Ian can answer the question from the smallest one. IAM policies. Does that all get replicated? Bucket policies, all of those things. Is that being replicated across the board as well?
So when you create your multi-region access point, you have the ability to create a policy with that. So it's an actual multi-region access point policy, and then that gets replicated to all the various regions.
Okay.
So that will apply. And it's the same thing with your VPC endpoint policy. If you create a VPC endpoint policy, that also gets brought around to all the regions with multi-region access point private link.
Okay.
So those go around.
So it's a separate thing you create for your
multi-region access point.
Exactly. Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Okay. So Alex Masha is mentioning the demo gods pray first. So let's see if Peter has submitted all the things he needs. Okay, Peter, can you make that bigger, like a lot bigger?
I can try.
Just control and plus and all the stuff that you need. So.
Got a lot of white space here.
Yeah. Can you just control and plus? Is that a possibility?
Yeah.
Or...
See if we can just make this full screen here.
No. CSS, right? So I mean, if you can just zoom the content in on the screen, right? So if you want, just in the browser, just zoom in the browser. That's fine. You
Sure.
can maximize it. Just zoom in the browser, and that should be fine.
Any better?
Perfect. Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Maybe just a little bit more. That's good.
There
That's
you
good.
go.
Excellent.
Yay! All right. So when we go to create our multi-region access point, there's not a lot to it. Really, we're looking at just a couple of data points here. So we need to give it a friendly name. Now, this name doesn't really have any bearing. It's just, this is going to be what you're going to refer to this as internally, kind of like a label, if you will. So we'll give it our Twitch TV name. And now here's where we'll go and decide which regions and which buckets we actually want to include behind this multi-region access point. We can create a new bucket, but I think most people were interested in selecting an existing bucket that they already had in place. So with our multi-region access point, you can select, again, one bucket per region up to 17 regions. If we try and select two buckets with the same region, it's going to come back and tell us too many buckets for that region. And you'll see here a little warning telling you, sorry, you've selected two from the same region.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
So when we select a source and a destination bucket here, we'll take a data lake example. We'll take a destination bucket here, one in West 2 and one in East 2 here in the US. We'll add those buckets. Not a lot to it. So now we can see we've got our two buckets selected here. And now we have to choose for the endpoint that we're creating, this new global endpoint, how public do we want to make this endpoint? By default, all of our buckets are private and our multi-region access points are private as well. So we enable block public access by default when we create this new endpoint. And that is literally the only two steps that you have to choose to configure or to create this new multi-region access point. I don't think we could have made it any easier, but I think this is pretty good for such a powerful feature. Really, it's about 2, maybe 3 clicks at the most to create this. Now, while we're doing this, this is actually asynchronously going out and setting up all of our certificate infrastructure at each of these regions. So Ian, do you want to talk a little bit about what's going on kind of behind the scenes here from the infrastructure side inside of AWS?
Yeah, absolutely. So while this is basically creating, we're setting up Global Accelerator, we're setting up the DNS entries, provisioning the certificates, the TLS certificates you'll need for TLS encryption, and configuring all of those to go across to these two buckets in the regions that Pete has selected. And so if you think about when you're going to 17, if you create a multi-region access point that has 17 regions behind it, we're going provisioning all those resources and infrastructure behind that as well. But it is quite fast, which is a really, really cool thing about it. Is this one ready, Pete?
So I just showed one of the examples that we had with 17 buckets all behind this one single multi-region access point, just to kind of show what it looks like here.
And so this is an example of how it works. I need to go, crouch underneath this thing. This is an example. Wait, you can see a second. This is Twitch. 1 second. Hi. This is an example of how this works when you use an existing bucket, right? But if you create a new can you create a multi-region bucket out of the box? So it will create the buckets for you in other regions, or do you have to already have those buckets existing somewhere?
Yeah, so when we look at our multi-region access point creation flow, let's go back and take a look at that and create a second one here. So when we go to create a multi-region access point, we'll jump back into that. We'll call it 2. Now here's where we actually have that option. So if we wanted to create new buckets in the region that we wanted to use, it's just going to then take you to the normal existing S3 create bucket flow. So there's nothing special or magical about this in terms of your buckets. You don't need to create new buckets, but you certainly can, and it's just going to take you to the create bucket flow right here. And if you want to use existing buckets, well, this will be where you'll add those existing buckets. Now you might ask also, which is a common question, well, can a bucket be in more than one multi-region access point? And the answer is absolutely yes. So I could take those same 2 buckets that I just selected, my data lake and my destination bucket in West 2 and East 2, add those to my new multi-region access point, and I can go and create that new endpoint as well. So there's no, sorry, I guess I need to have a better name here.
Right.
call it Twitch 2. Now when we go to create our new multi-region access point, even though it's the same buckets that we just selected for our first multi-region access point, that we now just have two separate endpoints that can either one be used to access the data that are in those two buckets.
I love this. Excellent. I love it when it's simple. So excellent. So all right. Let me just bring in
our Twitch TV one is ready. He is done. And so now there's really not a lot of additional configuration to do once our Twitch TV multi-region access point is complete. Here's our two buckets. The only really two options to set up now are the permissions, which is going to be the policy that Ian talked about earlier, where we will set up a standard IME's language policy for this particular endpoint. You can see our block public access is still enabled here. And then the second option is completely optional. This is where we would set up the replication rules. Now, could we go to the buckets directly, Jenna and Darko, to set up replication? Absolutely. Yeah. There's no difference in the replication being set up here with the multi-region access point or going to the buckets directly. It's the same engine, same replication rules, same options. So you'll be able to create those replication rules right from here. And then we'll actually even give you a replication metrics view. If you've enabled CloudWatch monitoring on your replication, we'll tell you how much latency is on that replication rule. We'll also tell you how many objects are lagging behind. And we'll also tell you how much data in terms of bytes the replication is lagging behind. You also get a nice replication summary here that customers really have loved. Ian, you want to talk a little bit about this replication map view here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is one of the coolest features. It's simple. It can get complicated when it's up to 17 buckets, but as you can see, you're basically selecting for this your two buckets, and you've got arrows showing that you've got two-way replication turned on for these buckets between these regions. If it's one-way replication, you'll also see that, and then you can basically scroll around the map, see where your data is replicating. And it's a nice way to visualize how your data is moving around the globe, which is not easy to just read from a table. I think it's cool to see it on an actual map.
Is there an example of the 17 buckets? Can we see that?
I do. Do you want to see that? It looks a little crazy. So it's a little, but yeah, I can jump into that.
It's a Friday evening. We can go crazy. That's okay.
I think my manager's listening to this as well. So hopefully I still am employed here Monday. But I just wanted to show you what a replication rule looks like here. Okay. This is how easy we've made it. It's basically kind of templatized. So if you want to send out data from one bucket to a bunch of different destinations, that would be the choice on the left. If you want to have that bidirectional sync replication where we're synchronizing the bucket contents, that would be the choice on the right. And now we can choose a little bit of our replication options. We want to enable the rule. And here is Jenna's question about how broad of a replication scope do we want? Do we want all of the objects in the bucket, or do we want just a prefix or a tag? Our replication is going to include any encrypted objects, and we're going to encrypt those with SSE-S3. And then finally, here are our options. This is where we decide if we want to synchronize the buckets bidirectionally. This is where we decide if we want to replicate deletions. This is where we enable the CloudWatch monitoring for the metrics. How far behind are we? How much data is left to replicate? How many objects are left to replicate? And then finally, kind of the cherry on top, replication time control. This is, again, our premium replication option where if you needed that SLA, 15 minutes or less for 99.99% of your objects, this is the option for you. And in this case, the monitoring and the metrics are automatically enabled when you choose replication time control. I love talking about it. It's one of my favorite features to talk about. It's just pretty unique with that SLA on top of the replication.
Wonderful.
Any questions about these?
Yeah.
No, this seems pretty clear.
I don't
Again,
have anything.
simple, great.
Okay, so now you're ready for the 17 bucket. It's a little spider webby. Let's take a look here.
Let's see if your laptop survives. It takes a moment to load, I guess.
All right.
While we're waiting for that to load, are there any customers that are already using this that we can talk about?
That's a good question. I don't know if I can say their names. I can tell you what
Okay,
industries
then.
they're in. We have some
Sure.
automotive customers. We have some IoT customers that want to send us telemetry.
Right.
We have some analytics customers on the data lake side. And we have some customers on the financial data analysis and subscription business that are using.
So what you're saying is it's used for multiple industries.
Right.
It is. Everybody, Jenna, needs faster S3.
Yes,
Everybody
exactly.
needs that upload and download.
And in
accelerated. All right.
in essence, this is still an S3 bucket underneath. So all the same
Yeah.
features and benefits, storage tiers, Glacier, Deep Glacier, all of this is part of this, even though it has a multi-access endpoint, or MRAP, as I'm going to call it now because I've seen the acronym. It has the same things, right?
That's right, and that's a great point on it, in that you can, if you are today already using cross-region replication to move your data around, and then having your different clients access that data either through configuration where they go to separate endpoints, or a proxy layer, or some baked-in logic, you can take it out. You can put in a single endpoint and let everything else be taken care of. So I think that's a really nice aspect, in that you don't you can take existing workloads and put this. Use this. You don't have to create everything brand new.
Mm-hmm.
I think we lost Peter. So, a couple of things.
It
could be
out of him.
the demo just crashed his laptop, or he got fired. He didn't get fired. I think it's something. I think Peter had issues with his technical issues. So yeah, folks, this is live. So yeah, Peter. I hope Peter will come back here. But speaking of getting fired. How much does this cost? We need to talk about pricing, right? And those things can. I think we need to get Peter for that. Peter is the right person to talk to us about that. Okay. Well, maybe Ian, you would know who is the. Why wouldn't customers use this thing, right? I think it sounds wonderful. I think it's great. I think it's just a nice way to kind of get your data across the world and have a single access point for that data. Why wouldn't you use this?
I think the key here is data mobility, right? And then a geographically dispersed set of clients or customers. That's really where this comes into account. If you are using S3 in a single region, you're in EC2, you're accessing your data, and that is working. That's really, and that is, I think, a vast majority of customers of S3 are using it in that way. Then MRAP is not something you will need at any point in the future. But if you start thinking, hey, I need my data in different locations because of compliance, or I need my data in different locations because of my customer base is growing internationally, that's when you want to start thinking about it. So it may not be right for you right now, but it may in the close future if you're looking to expand. So I think that's probably the best. Peter, if you want to jump in on that as well. Yeah, and welcome back. It was where is MRAP, or where is multi-region access points not a fit?
If you only have a single bucket, if you really are just in need of a single bucket, you can use S3 transfer acceleration today with that bucket, and then use CloudFront. If that really is just a single bucket is all you need, I don't think there's any reason for a multi-region access point in that use case. I don't think it's a good fit for that. S3 transfer acceleration and multi-region access points have similar performance benefits on an upload. So I think that would be one of the areas where I don't think it makes a lot of sense to have a multi-region access point.
Awesome. And Peter, we were waiting for you. We want to talk about pricing. I understand that sometimes pricing can be a complex thing, but how does pricing work on MRAPs, on multi-region access points with S3?
Sure. So there are two charges associated with a multi-region access point, and we tried to make it very much usage-based, which is kind of our standard here at AWS. And what I mean by that is the endpoint itself is really where we have the meter running. So the meter is based upon how much data you are routing through this endpoint. So this new multi-region endpoint that we've created here, again, hopefully you can see it, Darko. Here's our 17 regions behind a single multi-region access point.
Wow,
there we go.
Every gigabyte of data that you send through this new endpoint, there's a charge associated with that. In addition, if you are using internet-based uploads through this multi-region access point and want us to accelerate that up to that 60% number that we talked about, there's an additional charge for internet-based acceleration for uploads and downloads, where we take that traffic off of the public internet, bring it onto the AWS global network. That's an additional charge. And it's based upon the length of the haul of the transmission. So if it's coming from North America to Australia to Sydney, for example, that's a different charge than if it's all in the same continent of North America, US East 1 to US West 2 or something. So that is the second charge based upon the internet-based acceleration that we're doing and the length of the traffic that we're sending across our global network.
Gotcha. Okay. Excellent. Makes sense. And thank you. This looks wonderful. I actually just took a screenshot of it.
And you can hover over each site to kind of get an idea of what's going on at each of the different regions, I should say. How many replication rules are configured for that bucket in that region. So you can kind of get an understanding of what's there and kind of drill down.
Excellent. Well, Peter, Ian, thank you very much. We want to encourage the audience to check out the blog. So we're going to be posting the link to the blog post in the chat here. So I think I can do it now on Twitch, but I need to figure out how to do it on LinkedIn as well. So make sure to check out the blog post on this launch. And yeah, if you have an S3 bucket that's sitting across the globe and you want your audience to be able to access that bucket from anywhere, from a single endpoint, check out AWS MRAP or AWS, Amazon S3 MRAP, multi-region access points for Amazon S3, right?
Perfect.
Nailed it.
There we go. Excellent. Peter, Ian, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to have you here. And I'm looking forward to actually trying this thing out. So thank you both.